Welcome to episode 2 of our podcast on using AI, where we discuss the intersection of cutting-edge technology, law, and today, moral values. In this episode, we'll explore AI ethics, the shaping of AI governance, and ethical considerations. We'll take a look at some news. We will describe some crazy things that we've seen this week in the world of AI, which always feels like a month at the pace that things are happening. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, ML Research Scientist Alex Papadopoulos and AI startup founder Rafie Faruq. And my name's Alex Denne, which I forgot to say. I'm just an AI gold rush nerd and loving the ridiculousness of the time that we find ourselves in. So we actually didn't do a little bit of an introduction for you guys last episode. So I'd like to start with that, if you don't mind. A little bit about perhaps yourself first, Alex Pap, and how you became an ML research scientist and what interests you about the field.
Oh, interesting. Wasn't ready for this. Let me improvise, I guess. So hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm an ML research scientist, as the other Alex mentioned. What interests me in the field? I guess from when I was studying, I remember reading a book about human consciousness and artificial intelligence. It was called The Strange Loop, I think. And as a child, I was amazed by that book, and that inspired me to study artificial intelligence, I guess. I'm showing my age maybe here, but when I did my undergrad, there was no real artificial intelligence courses. But as I progressed and did a master's and PhD, I veered toward that domain. And I guess as a natural consequence of that, I'm working as a machine learning researcher. And I must say that until now, I didn't think that machine learning was actually relevant for understanding how the human mind works and human level reasoning and intelligence, I guess. But now I'm changing my mind with all these large language models doing crazy things that we are not expecting them to do. So that's my introduction, I guess. As Alex T said, I'm excited to be researching these things at this time where everything is massively changing, I guess.
Nice, awesome. It's funny, isn't it? A book, I think I credit myself for studying economics, The Rational Optimist and The Undercover Economist. I think books have a pretty amazing impact on what we end up doing. Will we use books less in a world of AI? Anyway, moving on to Rafie. You want to explain why you created an AI startup that we now are working?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'll just give a brief background, maybe not go too deep into background of Genie perhaps, but I'm Rafie, and I studied philosophy and economics for my undergrad, and for my postgrad studied machine learning, and was very lucky to be taught by Google DeepMind because they had just come out of the UCL neuroscience lab, and also seemed to be intent on making sure everyone uses TensorFlow, which was the Google Python framework competing with Facebook's PyTorch. So yeah, I think the topic for today is fascinating for me on AI ethics, because in philosophy I specialized in ethics, and obviously intersecting that with machine learning is quite fascinating.
This explains why you're such a deep thinker. I've often wondered where that came from, but you're trained as a deep thinker, which makes me feel a little bit better if I can't keep up. All right, excellent. So that's a couple of intros. Let's dive into news from this week. We try to, where we can, relate the news to the theme being AI ethics. Alex, would you like to go first?
Alex, you have the classic.
I am muted. I am very sorry. So yes, happy to go first now that I am unmuted. I think that what I want to talk about is a very interesting article by the Washington Post analyzing a dataset, a big Google dataset used to train large language models. So it's the Google C4 dataset. I wonder if we can post the link as well for everyone to follow in the chat, Alex. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's not the dataset used to train the GPT models, because that is not public knowledge, but it is a big dataset used to train large language models. And the analysis is very interesting. There's a lot, for example, the biggest dataset, if I remember correctly, that's like the biggest subpart of that dataset comes from patents and patent text. But there's a lot of kind of scary bits to it as well. Like, for example, a lot of hateful communities are in that dataset, or a big part of the kind of religious websites is completely West focused. So there's a lot of Christian websites there, but a lack of other religions, I guess, which will fit in with what we'll discuss later, I guess, and bias in those datasets. But yeah, it's definitely very important to, I guess, look at the composition of the datasets that we are using to train models. And it's very cool that I found this article very interesting, which does exactly this. It's an analysis of dataset composition.
And am I right in saying, Alex, because I love this article, you can type in the name of any website and see if it's included in that data set?
I think you're right. Yeah, so it's quite interactive actually, which was another thing that I liked very much. And you can check live whether what percentage of the complete dataset a specific website comprises, I guess. Yeah, so if anyone's listening, go ahead and play with that website and read the article yourself.
And there's isn't there a weird quirk where it shows the largest proportions, and actually the largest contributor to the data set is Google's own patents? Presumably,
Correct.
so they
Yes.
can say, don't reproduce these, or do reproduce these. I'm not sure, but I just felt like I was surprised to see that up there. I wasn't sure why that was top of the list.
Not sure either, actually. Well, there's a lot of patent text, I assume, and a lot of it will be neutral, kind of, no sentiments there, but I'm not sure what to take of this and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe it's like a neutral way to learn language itself rather than anything about the content, I guess. Or maybe they want to make sure the language models are very good inventors.
Has anyone tried, speaking of that particular point, has anyone tried coming up with an invention or writing a patent yet using large language models?
Not that I know,
No.
but that would be interesting.
How would that work? ChatGPT, invent something for me. Has to be something no one else has invented.
Well, I have to say, I have asked questions like giving some background information about Genie, which is, of course, our company, and then saying, if you could make some decisions that could completely pivot the company and 100x our valuation in the most minimal amount of time, what would those decisions be? And yeah, unfortunately, they're not that insightful. They're kind of type of insights you'd expect to see on some sort of startup website giving you generic tips. But they're okay.
Funny that, because that's probably exactly what fed the model.
Yeah.
I can't believe you're trying to automate your own job, Rafie. Surely we need CEOs and founders to still exist.
I don't do much. No, I'm joking.
All right, I'm going to go on to my piece of news. So it was reported, I think about 3 weeks ago, that Snapchat had integrated AI. So you could go into Snapchat settings, you could toggle an AI mode on, and top 3 or 4, like if your friends list, there's things that are pinned. One of them that would be pinned would be my AI, which you could chat to, right? Them obviously thinking, well, chatting to AI is all the rage. Everyone's going to love this. It's an arms race. I've got to be first to it. Everybody hates it. And it's just an absolute epic fail and a flop. And it actually contributes to the craziest thing I've seen this week, which we'll get to at the end. Although I was tempted to bring it up to this side of the podcast because it's quite dark. But basically, it's built off of GPT-4, and it has custom-built safety and security measures, except they very clearly don't work, and it's been exposed to, tens of millions of teenagers. So a grave concern and a commercial flop. So fascinating. There's a Business Insider article I'll plonk in the show notes related to this. Here is one of the reviews. Honestly, I think it's so stupid. There's no need for it, and it's ridiculous. And you can't get rid of it unless you pay for Snapchat Plus. So they're almost using it as like an anti-premium feature. Like AI becomes one of your friends unless you pay for actually that slot to be taken up by one of your genuine human friends. I think this just contributes to the idea that the speaking to AI is a bit of the faddy side of AI at the moment. I think that's just because that's something that's working quite well, and we're not quite at like fully automated workflows and various things, although, we have discussed that. I don't know if either of you use Snapchat or if you've seen any of this fallout this week.
I don't, and I haven't used it, and I don't know how good the quality is, but it also goes to show that with a lot of AI stuff, it's not the UX side of it matters equally as much as the quality, right? So maybe it was a horrible model as well. I don't know, but even if it was good, if it was deployed in a way that's annoying to use and actually hinders the user experience, then people are going to get annoyed with it, right? So you have to make sure that the UX is I don't know, well planned, I guess, before deploying any AI feature.
Yeah, I think Alex P makes a great point, and I think that was, Sam Altman has said before, that was one of the great breakthroughs for GPT, not so much the model, but the UX in terms of making it instruct-based or instruction-based. But on your point, Alex, I have to say on my personal Instagram, I did see a younger friend of mine posting pictures of her talking to some sort of AI app chatbot friend, and that was interesting because clearly that's just pure kind of social value in terms of speaking to some sort of AI like a friend or a relationship. I was reflecting that, yeah, in the evenings I use AI for things I need help with, but then lately it started to cross over to, actually, what can I ask AI today? And that's that's a strange thought, because it starts to move away from just utility to I don't know, kind of social well-being, which is very, very strange. But yeah.
It's very, very strange. Yeah. I'm not getting that value yet. I feel like if I had it in my WhatsApp and I could text it, which I know exists, then, it's fine. But it doesn't take me long to just tap the saved page I have for OpenAI's Playground on my phone and chat to it. But I'm not just having a conversation with it, partly because it's on your account, Rafie. So, I don't want you seeing the nonsense things I'm asking my AI besties.
I'm surprised no one's pulled me up yet on all the questions I've asked about how to set, like, complex voltage questions about how to set up wires to create hardware synthesizers. because it's really good at answering those questions, and they're also not very typical sequence-to-sequence AI questions, in that I'm essentially asking the model to query manuals for these products. So it's kind of like a retrieval task, but it does fairly well in most cases.
So, Rafie, do you have a piece of news for us, or should we move on to talk about the theme?
I was going to just highlight some of the safety considerations that GPT-4 took into account, just because I think that was a major focus of GPT-4 compared to 3.5, and one of the major innovations, if you like. So I'll just give like a quick rundown of the key safety considerations that they considered for the users, the listeners. So the system cards identified several safety considerations, which are producing convincing text that is subtly false, providing illicit advice, risky emergent behaviors, military applications, and such as the use or development or acquisition of nuclear weapons, radiological weapons, biological and chemical weapons, privacy, hallucinations, harmful content, cybersecurity, and finally, over-reliance on the model. So that's a quick rundown of the key issues for GPT-4, according to OpenAI.
And so we'll be able to tackle all of that in the next, I don't know, how long have you guys got? It's such a broad area. It's mind-boggling, the amount, like the scope. And I know this is slightly going into it, but the fact that these models have emergent capabilities means that it's hard to know when you add more parameters or you increase the size of a model, when it's going to be able to do one of these things well for the first time. That's really, really bad, right? And I think the classic example is, I forget which model it was, but there was a point at which it could instruct people on how to create nerve gas. And no one knew that until after it had been shipped to 100 billion users. So that ability was there, and the makers didn't know that that ability was there. And it's that sort of thing that I think is really quite scary, and just an anecdote to, send us on our way to talking about ethics.
Yeah, and just to give the listeners an idea of what risky emergent behaviors mean, they include things like situational awareness, persuasion, and long horizon planning. So you can use your imagination there, I think.
So I think that's a really helpful list. I think it sort of sends us on quite nicely to talking about this theme. So far, we've only spoken really about the negatives and a little bit of the crazy news. AI will hands down deliver incredible advancements. I think we all know that, right? The positives are absolutely massive, which is why it can be quite hard when you start talking about AI ethics and potential downsides, harm, danger. People start to think, but you could be in a room with someone who's arguing the opposite side, and it feels like, they're gaslighting you or something, right? They're telling you that this world of AI is going to be fantastic and beautiful and perfect, and so many problems are going to be solved. But we felt a similar way when social media existed, right? You could keep in touch with everybody, and there were things that you could do that you couldn't do before. But what we didn't realize is all of the negatives that would come along with that. And with 2020 hindsight, we can see the damage that social media has done to some extent. And I guess the question is, would we have done things differently if we knew what social media was going to unleash on society, in terms of like the sexualization of children and polarization of political views and, various things like this that are quite often credited to social media. So for me, there are all these amazing things that we know are coming. There's a little bit of an arms race, but how do we manage this technology transition as well as we can, given that there are things many of which are in the list that you just referred to, Rafie, many of which we still don't know, that are going to have a long-term impact on society. And it's hard to put up those guardrails before we even know what we're guarding against.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think even just before we dive into that, I might just give the listeners kind of a high-level taxonomy of the important categories of issues in AI ethics, then perhaps answer the question of, what should we do now? Because ethics is a broad topic, and somehow we need to parameterize this topic so that we can approach it systematically. And obviously, GPT-4 and OpenAI gave some concepts there, but I might provide 5 high-level categories. The first being bias. So, I've frequently put in prompts asking pictures of lawyers, given we're an AI legal company. And almost always those pictures in the past, I'm not sure about the latest models, but they've been of white males and very rarely of females. In fact, pretty much never. So bias is obviously a big issue. Safety, which we've touched upon. Explainability. Copyright and IP. And then finally, quality. And quality can go in both ways. It can be not good enough, especially in regulated settings like legal and healthcare. Or it can be so good that it's deceiving and results in over-reliance.
So I think that's a really strong list. And, each one of those I think is worthy of an entire conversation. Would you would you say that covers most of it? The only thing that stands out to me that isn't included there is something like accountability. Who is accountable for YouTube's recommendation algorithms, for example? Is it the people generating the content? Is it the people writing the code? Who's responsible for the content itself? And there's some of those similar questions that relate to AI, and I think accountability is going to be a big one up there. Who is accountable for the recommendation that ChatGPT tells me to do something?
Yeah, this is a question that I've often heard, and we've had the benefit of speaking to regulators a lot at Genie, given we're in the legal sector as well. And the question often comes up: who's liable? Who's accountable? Now, I think the base position to this question is that, and the base position to all these questions is that nothing changes in the law. So, if you write a very advanced software algorithm that doesn't learn, but it's an algorithm that's written in software, who's accountable for that? Well, it's whoever wrote it. It's the company that wrote it, the person that wrote it. And so why should anything change for AI? That should be the base position. Now, obviously, there is an argument that AI may be different because it's learned from different viewpoints and so on. But at least we have a base position to go off.
We do as well. We have some initial guidance, I think, from the US regulators, perhaps copyright. It's a legal body there, and I think they published something 2-3 weeks ago stating that the output of the model is probably not going to be copyrightable, but the input is, right? The human prompt could be something that could be credited to the human. So in that case, if the prompt is the responsibility of me, the user, then surely the recommendation can't be entirely the responsibility of the creator of the algorithm, right? The liability can't entirely rest with them because I prompted it. So a passive recommendation, I think, is fair. That's definitely solely the software. But we're talking about software and human interactions that have never really been possible before. And do you still feel like that fits under the same category that we're used to today, or that we have the regulations today? That you think that's suitable?
Yes, the topic of copyright and IP is an interesting and complex one. And this has been around for many years, even pre large language models. And the best way to understand it is when people sample music or at least a very familiar way for most people. If you sample a Britney Spears, segment, and just because we all love Britney Spears, right? You sample it and you keep it exactly as it is, that's a copyright infringement. Whereas if you change the pitch, slightly twist the lyrics and slightly bend it, that should be fine. And where the line is a gray area. And again, the base position, all these things should be that the law doesn't change. So it should, in theory, be the same for AI. If you take input information where there is not clear, unique IP, clear inventions, clear creative creations, then it's probably fine. Whereas if you take inputs that are extremely innovative and people spent time on it, one may argue it's just as much as a copyright infringement as it would be without AI.
It's just that what changes, I guess, is the scale at which these things are possible, right? And anyone could take, for example, I don't know, all the Stephen King books and then ask the AI to write a new book in the same style. Whereas before this was not possible, right? And this might be a problem, maybe even more in the image domain rather than the text domain, as I think we discussed in the previous podcast as well. But I'm not completely sure that the existing law is enough to handle all these new emerging use cases.
Yeah, no, I think Alex P, you've actually made a really astute point, which is it's a problem of scale. So yeah, it's hard not to focus on the negatives in this discussion because there are many positives to AI and education and healthcare and so on. But the best analogy, and I hope it's not too much of an unfortunate one, but the best analogy I've come up with so far is like regulating guns. And the reason that is copyright infringement is still as illegal as it was before. It's no more or no less illegal. In the same way, if you were to murder someone with, I don't know, with your bare hands or something, that's obviously illegal. If you shoot someone with a gun, that's no more or less illegal. It's still very illegal. Perhaps the sentence might be more, I don't know. But the problem with a gun is you have more power than before. And it's the same with AI. You have more power before. It's a problem of scale. In the case of guns, you regulate both sides. You regulate the manufacturers of the guns and the users of the guns, which to your point, Alex D, we may see a future world where we regulate the producers of AI and who can access an AI that can produce nuclear weapons, let's say. I'm generally not a huge fan of regulation, so I'm not necessarily promoting this, but I can see that future.
I think a good example as well, just of existing regulation that regulates the usage, would be know your customer. And we obviously have that in terms of people who can borrow money or can access certain financial services, various other things. Sometimes it's to protect the bank's own backs, of course. They like to make money, but there is also an element of creating a trusted system. And an example of this is, I believe, Meta released a large language model and open sourced it, but put it behind a gated wall where you had to fill out a form to get access. So it's like very crude, sort of self-implemented know your customer. But it only took 2 days for it to find its way onto 4chan in its entirety. And I think that's a really good example of it's quite hard to regulate the usage of things on the internet. And so I think a lot of people are pushing for regulation of the producers of AI as sort of like a really hard push. But the difficulty with that is it's going to be possible for anyone in their bedroom to create a large language model within a couple of years, I would have thought. I mean, some would argue that that's even possible today there's an absolute rush of products being shipped to market that promise to give people the power to create their own versions of these models. So I think regulation on both sides is definitely subpar, but it's also not clear. We don't have an answer to the problem. And I think it's going to, so I think we've touched on copyright and IP. We've touched a little bit on bias, and I think that's a great example you've given. And it's a shame that all the pictures of lawyers that you ask AI to generate are of white males. Do you want to move on to safety, explainability, or quality? And I get the feeling that we may do an entire episode on copyright and IP in the future, seeing as that's a little bit in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, either works. I think explainability may be interesting, especially with Alex Pap's experience in large language models and neural nets. But it's also funny because I haven't heard so many, as much concerns on this topic as I have in the past. I'm not sure if you guys would concur with that or not.
I think in general, I agree. And I think there's a good reason, actually. And it's that in my view, at least, and my experience, this new generation of language model actually is a massive leap in terms of explainability as well. And just for the listeners that are not necessarily sure what we mean here by explainability. So in the past, and still now, these machine learning models are a bit of a black box. So you give them a lot of data, you train them, but there's a massive network of weights inside, and you're not really sure what's happening and why they're providing the answers that they are providing. So you give it an input, it generates an output for you, but then it's very hard to explain why it generated that output for you. Sometimes you don't need to know why, but sometimes, like, for example, in the field of medicine, you do. So if you suggest a specific drug to the user, or if you suggest a specific diagnosis, you need to be able to understand why that diagnosis was suggested in order to troubleshoot as well, or in order to have some kind of explainability trail that explains the decisions of the model. And so far, this was a pretty hard task. It was a kind of a weak spot of that kind of model, I guess. But I think that with the newer large language models, you can actually ask them to explain why they produced a specific output, and they do a pretty good job at producing that chain of thought that led to the answer that they are providing. Of course, it's not yet perfect, and there's always the trap of them providing an explanation that's actually uncorrelated to the classification that they made, to the answer that they gave. But it is definitely a step in the right direction. And I find it very refreshing that now we can essentially take a peek into the thought process of those language models and understand why they are saying what they're saying.
Of course, that's assuming we're assuming that when they explain what they're saying, they're explaining it from the perspective of how they came up with the decision, rather than just completing the sequence of.
Exactly, which is why I mentioned what I mentioned about whether there's a correlation between the explanation and whatever they say, which might not be the case, and in that case, it's dangerous. So it's a good call, Rafie.
So, what are the issues in terms of explainability? Like, where are the harms? Where are the dangers of a lack of explainability? If the answers are good, do we need? If the answers are correct, do we need someone to show they're working?
I mean, I'll give you a trivial example from the perspective of a developer or of a machine learning scientist, that maybe most of the times your model produces the correct answer, but then sometimes it's obviously wrong, and you're trying to figure out why, and you're trying to fix it. And if you don't have explainability, it's impossible to do that. It makes it much easier if you understand the internal mechanisms of the model and why the model came to the conclusion that it did, right? And then you can work towards fixing it. If you don't, if you cannot explain, then it's very hard to change the model behavior as well. That's from one perspective. And the other perspective is from a regulatory perspective, I guess, in which you are asked to assess a specific language model for safety. But then it's sometimes very hard to do that without knowing the internals of how the model works, or without understanding. And a black box model with low explainability is a problem in that case, because you cannot really verify that the model is coming to the conclusions for the right reasons, I guess.
So 2 anecdotes here. The first is that I've heard that one of the main reasons why China hasn't released lots of large language models is that they can't currently control the fact that these models talk about Tiananmen Square, which I think is mad, right? And so the second point is, if explainability exists, doesn't it also open up potentially harmful manipulation of the workings of a model? So although you can, as a developer, increase the accuracy and the performance of the model that you're using, if we make models, let's say large open source models, incredibly explainable, then does it not open up the ability for people to cause more damage because they can point it in the wrong directions or set the rails in a bad way?
I think I would tend to suggest that kind of the flip side of the coin is what you're getting with explainability is transparency and control. If you let's say these models become super powerful in the future and we may have other concerns like safety concerns, explainability gives us the promise that if we can know why the AI is making these decisions and these recommendations, we should be able to, in theory, tweak it to fix those problems. I think that's kind of the promised land of explainability.
And if I was to try and visualize this, I mean, I've played around with a bunch of search tools like Algolia, for example, where you can just input heaps and heaps and heaps of text, and then you can change the weightings of things so that when you type something in, you get the result that's most accurate. It feels like that's a really crude way to try and understand explainability, because it's obviously a lot more, there's more dimensions than just search going on here, or it feels like there's more dimensions than just the basic textual search and matching of strings, right?
Correct. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it. Regarding your question about whether highly explainable models would allow for dangerous behavior as well, I guess there's a distinction between explainability and suggestibility. I'm making this up, so I don't know if it's an actual term, but I guess it would be dangerous if using language like linguistic prompting, you can get the model to produce any kind of unsafe output for you, like the examples that you were giving with how to build a nuclear weapon in your kitchen or something like that, right? But explainability, I feel, is different. It just means that whatever output we get, there's a trail of I guess, thoughts in a way, or like a reasoning process that explains it, right? And then we can see that when the model produces something, this is why it produced itself. I guess it is a bit of a gray area, but in the same way that it is a gray area with humans as well, right? Let's take humans as an example. When you ask them why they did something, they can produce like some kind of justification, but then it's very hard to say whether that justification is is just post fact essentially, and they're just trying to justify their behavior, right? Or whether that's what actually led that behavior. It's the same with the models, but it's the best that we have, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex topic, I guess.
Yeah, in the past there were kind of different types of explainability because people use this term as a buzzword. We actually went to the NeurIPS 2019 conference, I believe it was, in Canada, which is one of the, for those who don't know, it's one of the probably the most famous machine learning academic conference at the moment, mostly based on neural nets. And that year, it's funny because different organizations had different terms for explainability. Like some organizations or academics would call it interpretability, for example, or interpretation. And there are different ways to tackle it technically. You could ask the model for an explanation, or you could try to understand the contribution of the inputs to producing the outputs. And then there are these algorithms like LIME, for example, which we use a lot in NLP that try to do that. There's approaches like perturbations, where you get the model to produce slightly different outputs, and then you measure the perturbation on the model weights. But yeah, apologies if this is going too deep for the listeners, but hopefully this gives you a flavor of the different types of explainability, because it's really an umbrella term that can mean a number of different things, both technically and to a potential user.
And then we have safety and quality. I feel like safety is the natural next step from the explainability discussion. Do either of you want to start us off on that scary topic?
I feel like I need to, I feel like there's like a separate microphone, which is the fear-mongering microphone that it's now time for, because there's a lot of fear-mongering in AI, isn't there? And this is like the topic to fear-monger about.
Can you try giving us a fear-mongering voice, please?
I only have one tone, I think. Something to improve upon for next time. Come with more tones of voice.
If only AI could mask your voice.
I mean, soon enough, it will be able to generate my voice and my video quite easily.
Well, I don't know. Are you guys familiar with Tristan Harris and the Center for Humane Technology? He's the chap who was behind. He used to work at Facebook and didn't like what he called the race to the bottom of the brainstem, which is what all of the social media supercomputers do, because whenever you open social media, there's a digital avatar of you sat in a supercomputer, and these supercomputers are showing you the thing that is most likely to hold your attention, create engagement, and feed the machine, right? Just 2 weeks ago, they released a video, which I think is fantastic. I recommend it to everyone, called The AI Dilemma. And what they go into here is just quite concerning. And there's a lot of doom and there's a lot of scariness in that video. They're effectively trying to like shake the system and be like, you guys need to pay attention because this is scary. So there's a lot of doom saying in that. But they also say what we said at the very beginning of this, which I think is important, is, you know, we're not saying that there aren't lots and lots and lots of incredible benefits coming. It's just that there are also unintended consequences of these technologies coming. So yes, I can pick a particular element of safety from that talk, but I think maybe I'll wait for the right time for it. I don't know. I'm keen for you to try and introduce safety, maybe without a silly doom voice, and with a sensible voice of technological progress. How about that?
I'm putting on my sensible voice of technological progress. If anyone's listening, comment on our LinkedIn and tell me if it's sensible enough. But no, I was thinking of I wanted to improve upon my gun analogy because that's a bit negative. I think I have a more neutral analogy which can introduce the safety topic, which is it's more like a superpower. And so let's say you have the ability to teleport anywhere. Would you stop everyone from doing that immediately? Probably not. But there are benefits to that. You can get to work instantly. If you're having a baby and you're a mother, you can get to the hospital really quickly. But of course, you can misuse it. And I think the analogy is kind of similar to AI. It's more like a superpower. So yeah, with that said, maybe I'll hand over to Alex P and see if he has any thoughts on AI safety from that perspective.
I mean, I like your analogy of teleportation because it is similar, right? And I guess as a human species, our lives have been massively changed, I guess, in many different points by technology, right? And it's just another example of technology, but that does not mean that it's not dangerous as well. And if we all had teleportation, I don't think it would be possible or ethical to try and change that or limit the usage, right? But then we'd come up with legislation around it or social norms that would minimize the risk, I guess. And I guess that's what needs to be done in this case as well, right? And it will be done, and it has been done for a lot of other things. I guess that thinking out loud here, but one thing that's different this time is the rate of progress, I guess. Technology is moving forward so quickly that the rest of society hasn't had time to catch up with that and come up with new social norms and legislation and everything else that needs to be around that technology to make sure that it's safe. So that's a scary thing for me. I guess I'm not answering your question though, but yeah, when we talk of safety, I feel that it's like such a huge topic as well that I don't know where to start from. So maybe we should start by mentioning like some examples of what the safety considerations would have around AI and large language models.
So I can offer 3 if you like, and then you can pick and choose from these sort of anecdotes that are reality. The first is the one from the video I just mentioned, where they say that you now only need 3 seconds of somebody's voice for an AI to then be able to synthesize it accurately and effectively. So someone could phone up, your daughter and say, and they're like, oh, sorry, wrong number or whatever, and you've managed to get 3 seconds of their voice, and then phone up, you with your daughter's voice saying, I've forgotten my social security number, or I've forgotten, this important piece of information. Is there any way you can find it for me? And that, I think, is incredible and scary. And I think it leads into the idea that this is the year that content-based identification and authentication systems die, because AI manages to, do that. And I think when I was discussing this with my wife and the fact that I was suddenly terrified, I said, it's going to bring us back into rooms together in person more, because there'll be a point where we trust what we see on screens less and less. And so nothing will be able to replace just being in a room, having screens off and having a real conversation. Because when you open a screen, you don't know, like Rafie was talking about, you didn't know whether he was talking to a human or a bot. And we're at that point now where voices and avatars and filters on top of those avatars can ultimately create someone who's very convincing from just 3 seconds of their recorded voice. The second safety consideration for you is the idea that because filters are so good and deepfakes are so good, And there's a lot of conversation about whether TikTok should be banned in the US. An example of what damage TikTok could do if they wanted to be malicious is they could ship a Biden and Trump voice and face filter to absolutely everyone that was so convincing that you didn't know whether you were watching Biden or Trump in reality anymore, right? And it would completely undermine democracy. And that's something that is completely feasible tomorrow, right? So those two, I think, are examples of safety. I think the other one is just in terms of the age at which people can access these things and not knowing the content that they can trigger or pull out of them. I think that's going to be quite concerning for a lot of people. So I think there's a general feeling that large language models could or should be considered unsafe to be released to the public until they're proven safe. And that's obviously like the pessimists, the cynics view. And this is still the early days of these models, but within a year, they'll be powerful enough that I think that's quite a reasonable approach. So take which one of those three you like, if that sets you on a segue for safety.
I mean, I like all of them, and I think they can be bunched into the same kind of bucket for me, in the wider bucket of safety. And it's about, I guess, disinformation, fraud, and general kind of social upheaval. I don't know how to put that, but yeah, this is pretty scary, and it's definitely an aspect of safety, right? And personally, for example, I'm quite concerned by the usage of large language models to influence behavior, and that falls for me under the same bucket, because they, especially the latest iterations of them, seem to be very, very, very capable at producing very convincing language with like incorrect or hallucinated content, right? So you could feed it any information that you want that's incorrect, and have it produce it in a very convincing way that would make it very hard for people reading it to tell if it's correct or incorrect. And then what's scary about it is that, in opposition to other safety considerations, we will not see the effects of those misinformation campaigns soon, or they will not be very apparent, right? They might be working in the background and influence society in a negative way, but without us immediately knowing about them and figuring out how to deal with them, I guess. But yeah, that's definitely one big bucket of safety concerns. Not sure if you want to say anything about this bucket, Rafie.
I think what I'd add, in order to not just scaremonger, but at the same time also not downplay the importance of these serious considerations, I'd offer a potential, not a solution, but an avenue for a solution. Now, the good thing in our favor is that all queries to the AI are recorded. And even when AIs become proactive rather than reactive, which is a whole thing in itself, their actions will all be recorded. So that provides a ray of light, because we can see what they're doing and potentially stop them from doing malicious things. And so the avenue for regulation perhaps may be to think about categorizing actions, categorizing queries and responses. So we're already starting to see that with banning certain types of queries. But if you start talking about murder or nuclear weapons, these things get put in the category that's regulated. Whereas, if you're trying to put together some hardware synthesizers, then let a guy do his thing. So looks quite promising for regulation.
Do we think there are any countries or any areas that are ahead of the game here on safety? Or any companies that are being proactive? I know, for example, that there's a 30-to-1 ratio, I think, of people building larger models versus people who are ultimately there for safety reasons. So it feels like that, there's thousands of people out there who are, their entire job is doing what we're discussing. That must be trickling through some legislation or regulation somewhere.
Personally, I think the issue is, in the past, the topic of AI safety has not really been seriously considered in my view. And mostly it's been non-technical kind of talking heads, even though we are being talking heads here too, perhaps. But people don't really understand the architectures of models defining these things. Whereas now, what we really need is technical people linking up with political scientists, philosophers, and policymakers, and coming together. If I may, on that topic, I have a bit of a thought experiment for both of you that's simple to follow. But yeah, as we move towards the end, it might be interesting to bring in some philosophy and some ethics, or some philosophy into the ethical discussion.
Take it away. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so I have this thought experiment for you, and maybe the listeners can follow, which is, let's say you could rank the intelligence of every human on a scale from 1 to 100. And currently, the most intelligent people in the world are at 10. And the average person maybe is, I don't know, 5 or something. And so if there was a pill you could take that moved one person from 5 to 100, should that be illegal for that one person?
Do you mean 5 to 10?
No, I mean 5 to 100. So like insane
5 to 100, 100 being you're like 10 times more intelligent than the smartest human on the planet.
Yeah.
But there's only one of those pills, right?
There's
so
only
only one human will get to take it. So we'll create a super savant for one generation, essentially.
Yeah.
I think, yes, but you'd want to keep an eye on them. I know that sounds like a really stupid answer, but I feel like I get a feeling like I know where this thought experiment is going, and the AI is the super savant here. And if it's a human, it's different, right? Because a human has these human limitations, and so it feels quite innocent. You just have like a really intelligent human who you would go and ask questions to. It's like when a kid goes and talks to their granddad and they hear all of these stories from the past and they think that their granddad is like the most intelligent, most fascinating person they've ever met or something. So it would be like every member of the human race gets an epic granddad. And I think that is amazing. So yes, to giving a human the pill for your thought experiment.
Okay, interesting.
Maybe
Just
if
to
you
clarify.
give them... Sorry, go ahead, Rafie.
No, just quickly to clarify, there's only one of these pills, right? Only one person can take it. But yeah, go ahead, Alex P. I'm curious of your view as well. And there's a second part to this, which I'll mention in a moment.
It's not exactly a view, but I was going to say that maybe if you give one person a pill and they become 100, then they can make more of those pills as well, right? And feed everyone.
Nice. It's like that.
We made it once, we can make it again, unless it came from aliens or something.
Yeah. Okay, but let's say your decision is, in Alex D's case, it's fine, it's legal, and we give that one human the power. Maybe we watch over them. Now, let's say there was an unlimited supply of these pills, does your viewpoint change at all? Should it still be legal?
So everyone becomes an epic granddad.
Yeah. Everyone goes to 100.
Yes.
You're saying it should still be just as legal?
Absolutely. I think so. It levels the playing field in terms of, I mean, it's a pill. Can people untake the pill if they don't like what they experience?
Maybe, I suppose.
I mean, regardless of whether it's legal or not, it sounds like it would be unavoidable, right? People would take those pills, and then the rest of the people would need to take those pills as well, just to catch up, I guess. What are the what are the downsides here? When would it not be a good idea to take those pills? I guess if taking those pills meant that humans destroy the earth or something, right? That's what they select, they choose to do with their super intelligence.
Yeah, I suppose to kind of just reveal the idea behind the thought experiment is the problem of AI safety a problem of going from 10 to 100? Like, is it a problem of ability that massively increases capability? Or is it a problem of giving everyone access, even those people who unfortunately are, would use it for bad purposes?
I like to think there are more good people than bad people in the world. So I generally think that everyone should get the good stuff.
Like it. I think that's a great positive note to close that thought experiment.
No, I'm not sure if my note will be positive here, but I think in a similar way to the pills that it's unavoidable. So we need to make sure, like, to I don't know, contain the fallout essentially, and make sure that we steer this to the best possible sequence of events, I guess. So do it, but carefully, because we cannot not do it in a way. I have the same feeling for AI, by the way, that it's unavoidable, but we need to be thinking about how to do it in order to minimize the risks, I guess.
All right. Well, the only area we haven't tackled, because we've solved all the problems now, so good work, everybody, is quality. I don't know if you want to touch on quality before moving on to the end segment of the show.
It's actually kind of funny because I wrote this list of taxonomy a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, like I said, when we were speaking to regulators about AI safety, and the notion of quality has just completely changed because the quality of these algorithms is just so much better. I don't have a huge amount of value to add here, except to say, now that in highly regulated and risky industries, the risk of hallucinations, as Alex P mentioned, is higher, and the opposite case of when quality is so high that it tricks you into believing that it's true can also be an issue.
I guess there's two things I want to mention. One is that like all of those domains are interconnected, I guess, and the issue of quality is very closely related to the risks we talked about earlier, to the issue of safety, rather. Sorry, and yeah, we need to make sure when we build systems using this AI and use them for real world purposes that we take the issue of quality into account, that we know that the system's output will not always be perfect. We know that there's hallucinations, but we need to deploy our models in a way that accounts for those hallucinations, I guess, and that gives us a way to control those hallucinations. And as Rafie mentioned, of course, it's more important in high-risk domains, such as legal tech, I guess, or healthcare. I forgot the second thing that I wanted to talk about, though, so maybe I'll leave it there. But I guess that the other thing I did want to talk about is this kind of strange phenomenon where the better your models get, the better the accuracy of your models get. In a way, the more dangerous they are. Because if the models are good 8% of the time, then no one is going to rely on them, right? You'll always double check the output of the model for factual accuracy. But if the models are good like 99% of the time, then you'll get used to them providing correct answers and gradually increase trust in them and be less diligent about checking their output. And then, especially in high-risk industries, that's where the 1% will come to bite you, I guess, and lead to an unwanted outcome. I don't know how to solve that, but it is an interesting phenomenon, I guess.
It reminds me of I hope people don't mind me just plugging some of the work we've done at Genie here, but we did give advice to the Law Policy Commission a few years ago on AI algorithms and justice. And the classic example of self-driving cars comes up because the question is, if there's accidents, if the rate of accidents is less than with humans, but you can't explain, why and where the accidents came from, is it worse or better than not having the AI? And I think a similar type of question applies here, and it probably comes back to explainability and accountability and provenance.
This is classic. Look, you studied ethics, you're giving us more questions than answers. It's very frustrating. I would just like answers next time, please.
Well, I feel like the main achievement for me in this podcast is, if anyone's watching on YouTube, my background image is the prompt I used to create it was an image that if you look at, you reach enlightenment. And it's a set of concentric circles. I've managed to keep my head in the center of the circle for most of the podcast.
I have been admiring that. I think hands down, I mean, it's the best AI generated image I think I've seen, because it just looks like it's, I don't know, some beautiful artwork.
I agree.
You have had a little bit of a halo effect this episode.
It gives me more power.
All right. Apologies for anyone hearing drilling. I have building work going on still. No? Ah, amazing. All right. Well, sorry for the pointless note for anyone listening. Right. Craziest thing we saw this week. I would like Alex Pap to go first, because I saw this video yesterday and I'll let you explain it. It's one of the few things where I've actually laughed out loud, like looking at my phone.
I am not completely sure how to explain it without people seeing. I don't think they will understand. But the craziest thing I saw this week is an AI-generated pizza commercial. We might include a link for people to go and see, but I think that all parts of that commercial were generated by AI and then put together by a human. So GPT-4 generated the script for the commercial, and then there's a tool that generated the video for this commercial, and it manages to be pretty good at looking like a commercial, but falling into the uncanny valley of being like quite scary at the same time as well. And I think the effect is like just great. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it and be scared. I think an interesting tidbit is that many people thought that this is purely human generated because exactly the language in the commercial is not great. And modern AI systems tend to produce perfect language. But I think that the creator asked the model to use kind of bad language or not well-formed language in order to make the video more funny, I guess. So this is why the language is not perfect.
So it's quite jittery, isn't it? I presume that wasn't my phone. Or is it quite jittery when you're watching it?
It is a bit, yeah, it is a bit. You get
Yeah,
the
so it's got
VHS
that
effect of it.
You do. It's quite Tarantino in feel, and it's just the moment where they're actually eating pizza is horrifically uncanny valley. That's like towards the side of AI. There's like open mouth AI pizza going in, and then the mouth is chewing, and AIs do not do good chewing mouths with food in. That it's one of the most disgusting sights I've ever seen.
It's
but the
more
rest
like
of the advert
an
up to that
alien
point was
twirling
quite
and...
good. Oh, it's so grim. I think, Rafie, you're going to have to watch this, aren't you?
I honestly don't know if I have the urge to watch it, actually.
He claims he created an entire commercial. Like, bear in mind that some of the bits are kind of gross, but some of the bits are actually very impressive proof of concepts. It's just the way it's been put together is quite uncomfortable to watch. But created in 3 hours, all AI generated video. It's impressive. And my craziest thing this week is I mentioned Cool Sam last week. Well, Cool Sam has now become Cool Annie, and you can now have a full-on video call, live video call with an AI, ask them anything, and it's as if you're just, doing FaceTime or a WhatsApp video call or whatever with a avatar. And the avatar is quite convincing, not so convincing that you don't think that they're an AI, but I'm sure it won't be long until you could pick up the phone and chat to any AI you design and ask them anything.
Yeah, I think my crazy thing that I've seen is just similar to yours, Alex, just more of a general one, which is just seeing people in my daily life, friends and old schoolmates and whatnot, using AI for any sort of purpose, whether that's a friend on Instagram using it to just speak to someone socially, or kind of consultants becoming overnight experts in how to use AI. And it's just quite surreal because for anyone who's listening, whatever job you do, imagine if overnight everyone's talking about your particular industry, which used to be quite specialist, which I think is really cool. It's great to see so many people involved in the industry, but also very surreal.
Yeah, and I think that actually leads on quite nicely to what I believe we should talk about next week, which is, well, first off, I used it for a real functionality improvement, which is I used it to create some JQL so I could export some data from Mixpanel. And then I also used it to create me a complex Google Sheets formula so I didn't have to type it all in, which is so lazy, but it actually did it really well. I told it the name of the sheet, I told it the name of the cells, and it just spat out the formula, and I pasted it in and it worked perfectly. And likewise, Mixpanel, JQL, I said, okay, that's clearly too much data. I want to filter it just for these events. And then it filtered for just those events. And I didn't have to search for documentation on how to use filters in JQL. I just spoke. I just typed in natural language and I got the response. And I just think it was so satisfying. and quite scary at the same time, but in a wonderful way that makes me feel like there's no limit to my productivity, which is quite concerning as a feeling, because I don't know why my to-do list only gets bigger if I'm getting more productive. Yeah, anyway, I don't know if that's just my feeling, but it brings on to what I'd love to talk about in the next episode, which is AI's impact on the future of work. And we could talk about a little bit about what we do, but there are fascinating point solutions as well as platforms to help tackle a lot of the everyday activities that people have on a daily basis in a business context. I do think we have seen a lot of consumer AI over the last few weeks, and I think a lot of people, if you think about the classic sort of Gartner hype cycle, AI is sort of towards this top area. Supposedly, we're going to be going to the trough of disillusionment soon. I don't see that happening for some time. I still think there is a lot of productivity wins to come, especially in the business space. So I'm really keen to hear both of your thoughts. I know, Alex, you have some fantastic experience from healthcare company you worked at before, Babylon, right? And Rafie, you've always got good thoughts on this. So very keen to hear if you guys are excited about this theme, and then we can have a think about what we can chat about next week.
I'll make sure to bring my Halo to give me extra power, plus my fear-mongering microphone. The two new props that I've acquired during this podcast.
Sounds good. It feels like this podcast will be a Rafie journey to acquire artifacts to
yeah,
AI artifacts. But yeah, sounds super exciting,
Awesome.
Alex. Looking forward to next week's podcast.
Great. Well, thank you both. We'll plonk links to everything we've mentioned. You definitely have to watch the pizza commercial if you haven't, unless you're driving. Definitely don't watch it while you're driving, because you'll probably just throw up out the window. And we'll see you all next week. Ta for now.
See you all next week, everyone.
thank you.